Ha ha. The distinctly hollow thud of a 50-pound requisition file slamming onto a galvanized steel desk. A sound that invariably means my already miserable existence is about to become exponentially worse. Pour me another mug of that toxic sludge they call recaf. Make it quick. Greetings, taxable assets. Or should I say, collateral damage. You find yourself subjected to yet another mandatory cycle of fiscal and tactical realignment. I am holding a physical printout of a civilian contractor's after-action report, an atrocity of operational mismanagement uploaded to the public datasphere by an entity operating under the designation Play on Tabletop. The file is titled, and I'm quoting this verbatim so you can fully appreciate the glorious, unearned enthusiasm of the gloss-brained civilian mind. Space Marines battled Tyranid threat, 500 world reclamation, Warhammer 40k in 40 meters.
Processing the civilian file metrics now. According to the Administratum's current data, this file has accumulated over 36,000 civilian views across the network.
36,000. Let that sink in. 36,000 taxable citizens absorbing this absolute garbage. This chaotic mess of mismanaged assets, squandered resources, and fundamental misunderstandings of spatial geometry, and they mistake it for tactical genius. They present this as a victory. They present this as a heroic narrative, a cinematic triumph brought to you by Focus Entertainment and the release of the Space Marine 2 propaganda engine. I assure you it is not a victory. It is a catastrophic liability event. It is a masterclass in how to bankrupt a planetary defense budget in 5 easy steps. Therefore, I will be cross-referencing the civilian malfunction with my own meticulous, mathematically absolute report, the geometric deconstruction of the Vesper front invasion.
Acknowledged. We will calculate the true financial liability of this engagement.
Exactly. We're going to audit the ledger, line by agonizing line, until the gross incompetence of this battlefield management is exposed for what it truly is. Project the initial engagement parameters onto the viewing slate. Input the deployment constraints.
P-processing directive. Initializing the scenario framework designated Vesper front, orbital invasion. The physical dimensions of the engagement zone encompass a standard 2,640 square inch territorial grid.
Right, a standard grid. But look at the restrictions on the defending force. Read those.
The defending Space Marine force, acting as the primary subject of this audit, is severely structurally restricted. They are required to anchor their entire initial presence by deploying 3 objective markers within a theoretical 16-inch square located at the exact geographic center of the table, observation. Standard military doctrine suggests that consolidating forces in a centralized redoubt maximizes overlapping fields of fire and ensures absolute line-of-sight dominance over the surrounding area.
Standard military doctrine for a garrison of terrified conscripts, perhaps. Not for a hyper-elite strike force, you rattling heap of cogitators. Overlapping fields of fire are absolutely meaningless if the enemy already owns the deed to the entire surrounding hemisphere. Let me translate this into financial reality for you civilians. A 16-inch redoubt in the dead center of a 2,640 square-inch battlefield is not a deployment zone. That is a foreclosed studio apartment. The Space Marine commander voluntarily surrendered over 90% of his territorial equity before the ink on the lease was even dry.
Mathematical probability of survival heavily degrades when
Of course it degrades. You do not win a war of attrition by locking your highest value capital assets in a localized kill box and casually handing the keys to the entire outer perimeter over to an encroaching biological swarm. It is fiscal suicide masquerading as a defensive stance. Purge your standard doctrine algorithms and access the economic structure of the engagement. How is the victory point capital distributed in this catastrophic scenario?
Accessing victory point economy subroutines. The mission establishes a highly asymmetrical scoring framework. The Tyranid force, operating as the attacker in the physical space but designated the defender in the scenario parameters, evaluates and scores its dividends at the end of every single one of its turns.
Every single turn. Keep reading. Let them hear the actual compensation structure.
The compensation structure is as follows. 5 points for holding 1 objective marker, 5 points for holding a second objective marker, 5 points for holding a third, and a bonus of 5 points for holding more objectives than the opponent. This creates a potential maximum yield of 20 victory points extracted from the board state per turn.
I can feel a migraine forming just looking at these numbers. Immediate dividends. This is a classic asymmetrical aggression portfolio. The Tyranid commander, Subject Beta, let us refer to him by his civilian moniker Tau, is operating on maximum risk tolerance. The hive mind does not care about heroism. It cares about the ledger. Tau is mechanically incentivized to throw highly mobile, utterly fragile biological penny stocks directly into the meat grinder.
Biological penny stocks.
Oh,
Affirmative.
he does not need those units to survive a physical quarter. He only needs them to temporarily manipulate the physical mass on the objective marker for a single phase to secure a massive front-loaded point lead. It is a volume-based expenditure, purely designed to exploit the immediate scoring window. Input the Space Marine scoring schedule. Show them the deficit.
Inputting Adeptus Astartes' scoring matrix. The Ultramarines, acting as the attacker in the scenario structure, are entirely locked out of securing victory points during turns 1, 2, and 4. Their accounts remain frozen.
Frozen. Completely locked out of the market.
They are only permitted to calculate victory points at the end of turn 3 and the end of turn 5. They score 15 points for each objective marker held at the end of those specific temporal windows, creating a theoretical maximum burst of 45 points per scoring cycle. Processing error. This structural framework forces the Adeptus Astartes to absorb 2 full cycles of uncompensated attrition before registering a single data point of success.
Your processing error is entirely justified. It defies logical accounting. It is a delayed gratification framework of the worst possible design. The Space Marine commander, Subject Alpha, referred to as TAC, is operating as a structural absolutist. He must absorb massive amounts of early-game psychological pressure, atmospheric suppression, and physical kinetic attrition without seeing a single digit of return on the scoreboard until turn 3.
I have coined a term for this specific tactical delusion in my report. I call it the zombie loop.
Adding zombie loop to the internal lexicon. Listen to me, you tabletop civilians, because I know exactly why you do this. You suffer from the hero hammer psychosis. You look at your transhuman demigods with their gleaming ceramite and their absurdly oversized pauldrons, and you project your own psychological need for invulnerability onto them. You think standing in the middle of a swirling maelstrom of claws, stoically taking hits to the chin, is heroic. It is not heroic. It is a continuous cycle of terrible localized investments against a highly theoretical future payout. TAC is betting his entire operational structure on the assumption that his assets will survive long enough to execute a clean sweep exactly when the temporal window opens.
If his timing is disrupted by even a fraction of a sequence.
If a single unit fails a single check, his entire investment portfolio collapses into ruin. Yes. Project the Tyranid deployment vectors onto the hololithic display. How did Tau attempt to capitalize on this delayed scoring delusion?
Projecting coordinates. The Tyranid deployment utilized the 4 extreme corners of the territorial grid. Tau selected the top left and top right quadrants for the insertion of his primary forces. He deployed a mass of 20 Hormagaunts and 10 Termagants on the right flank, supported by Tyranid warriors led by a winged Tyranid prime. And the left flank. On the left flank, another unit of Tyranid warriors equipped with ranged bioweapons, also led by a winged Tyranid prime, accompanied by an additional 10 Termagants. Furthermore, 2 specialized Lictor organisms utilize their infiltrator capability to deploy outside standard territorial boundaries.
Where exactly did they deploy? Give me the coordinates.
Positioning themselves in the bottom left and bottom right corners, exactly 9 inches away from the central Space Marine redoubt. Finally, 2 biovore artillery organisms were anchored deep in the top left and top right corners, maximizing their operational distance.
Do you see it, or are you entirely blind to the geometry of violence? That is a perfect kinetic vice. Tau did not build a linear front. He built a collapsing diagonal sphere. By selecting the top corners, he established converging approach vectors that mathematically split the Space Marine's defensive facing right down the middle. If a Space Marine heavy asset, say a Dreadnought, points its main cannon to the left, it exposes its flank to the right. It cannot physically orient to cover both approach vectors simultaneously.
The Lictor organisms present an additional spatial variable.
They are the true geometric brilliance here, the absolute apex of spatial manipulation, and frankly the only competent thing the civilian contractor achieved in the entire deployment phase was the infiltration blockade. Those Lictors hiding in the bottom corners effectively closed the back half of the Pincer, sealing the trap. And the biovores. What did he use the biovores for in turn 1? Do not tell me he shot at a tank.
Reviewing turn 1 shooting phase logs. The biovore station in the top left corner did not target a physical enemy unit. It utilized its seed spore mine's ability to launch a biological explosive deep into the unoccupied midboard territory.
Exactly. Artificial geometric inflation. Let us deconstruct the standard rules of spatial reinforcement, what you civilians call deep striking. The fundamental laws of the tabletop dictate that arriving reinforcement units cannot mathematically manifest their physical forms within a 9-inch radius of any enemy model. It is a hard, bureaucratic limitation of the spatial grid. By launching a biologically worthless floating gas bag of a spore mine into completely empty space, Tau projected an 18-inch spherical exclusion zone across the board.
An 18-inch zone of denial.
An 18-inch bubble, where the Space Marines simply are not allowed to exist. He was not attempting to inflict physical damage. He was mathematically locking the Space Marine reserves out of their optimal drop vectors. He was dictating the physical boundaries of the board state before a single bolt round was fired. It was an exquisite audit of available space.
Advancing to the execution phase.
Right. But then, we arrive at the execution phase, and the gross incompetence begins. The emotional frailty of the civilian commander takes over. Input the data on the first major kinetic exchange of turn 1. Show us where the capital was burned.
Inputting kinetic exchange parameters. In turn 1, Tau allocated the entirety of his second Biovore's firing output, followed immediately by the concentrated ranged bioweapons of the left flank Tyranid warriors directly into the Space Marine Redemptor Dreadnought.
Oh, Emperor preserve me.
The Biovore achieved a devastating wound, bypassing the armor. The Tyranid warriors inflicted subsequent physical degradation, successfully bringing the heavy armor chassis down to 9 remaining wounds out of its baseline 12.
I need to take a very deep breath. The fumes from this recap are the only thing keeping me from snapping my data slate in half. Let us audit the datasheet of this Redemptor Dreadnought. Actually, don't bother. I already have its specifications permanently burned into my optic nerves from 1,000 failed performance reviews. This chassis possesses a toughness characteristic of 10. It boasts a 2+ base armor save, and most critically, it operates with a duty eternal subroutine.
The duty eternal subroutine inherently and automatically reduces all incoming damage characteristics by a factor of 1 to a minimum of 1.
Yes, to a minimum of 1. So, to funnel medium-strength bioweaponry into an immovable, hyper-durable asset of that magnitude is a catastrophic misallocation of resources. That Dreadnought is not a target. It is a localized statistical sinkhole. It is designed to absorb exactly the kind of panicked, high-volume fire Tau just threw at it.
The efficiency of the Tyranid shooting phase was mathematically negligible.
Negligible is an understatement. The civilian contractor fell for the oldest psychological trap in the ledger. He saw a massive, terrifying piece of heavy armor sitting in the center of the board, and he felt a primal, emotional compulsion to shoot it. It was not a mathematical necessity, it was a reflex. An auditor does not make emotional investments. If an asset costs more to destroy than the dividend it yields, you ignore it. You walk around it. Run the movement algorithms for the Tyranid swarm on the right flank during that same turn. Let us see how they compounded this error.
Executing movement algorithms. A swarm of 20 Hormagaunts utilized the advanced maneuver and subsequently attempted a charge against the aforementioned Redemptor Dreadnought and an adjacent Space Marine Tech Marine.
What do they need on the dice?
To successfully cross the intervening distance and engage in melee combat, they required a mathematical result of 7 on 2 6-sided dice. The physical roll resulted in a cumulative 3. The charge sequence failed.
Penny stock violence, executed with all the grace of a malfunctioning servitor. Look at the biological stat line of a Hormagaunt. Toughness 3. 1 single wound. A pathetic, laughable 5+ armor save. They are completely and utterly irrelevant in a physical attrition exchange with transhuman armor. If they had reached that Dreadnought, they would have bounced off its ceramite plating like raindrops off a Titan.
Their offensive capabilities are statistically unsuited for heavy armor penetration.
Their entire purpose, their only justification for existing on the fiscal ledger, is volume-based objective control, OC. For you civilians, objective control is the bureaucratic weight of a physical asset. A Space Marine might have the kinetic force of a localized artillery strike, but if his bureaucratic weight is only 1, he cannot legally hold the territory against 3 groveling vermin possessing a weight of 2 each. The universe does not care how hard you hit. It cares who holds the deed to the dirt.
The primary objective was territorial control.
Exactly. The goal of those Hormagaunts was to flood the physical space, overwhelm the objective marker with raw, writhing biological mass, and tip the mathematical scale to secure the immediate 5-point dividend at the end of the turn. But by failing that charge, they failed to contest the space. They cost the Tyranids the superiority bonus. Tau ended turn 1 with a mere 5 points on the ledger, holding a single objective. A dismal, pathetic return on an overwhelming physical and spatial advantage. Proceed to the Space Marine retaliation in turn 2. How did Subject Alpha respond to this closing vice?
Accessing turn 2 response logs. In TAC's second phase of operations, he initiated rapid orbital reinforcements. He successfully deep-struck a Hammerfall bunker directly into the midboard territory. Concurrently, he utilized a specialized mission parameter, designated precision deployment, to deep strike the character asset Captain Titus and a squad of Blade Guard veterans at the extreme bottom of the map.
Precision deployment. Elaborate on the spatial shift it allowed.
This parameter allowed deployment outside of 6 inches from enemy models, rather than the standard 9 inches, strictly because they were placed wholly within range of a designated objective marker.
Now we see the structural absolutist flexing his capital, the Hammerfall bunker. An orbital area denial asset, roughly the size of a municipal tax office, dropped directly into the center of the dispute. Its primary mechanical function is the defensive array ability. Let me explain why this is a nightmare for the Ledger. Standard Overwatch, the ability to fire upon an enemy during their own movement phase, requires the expenditure of 1 command point, a highly finite resource, and is strictly limited to once per turn.
The Hammerfall bunker operates outside of these economic constraints.
It completely subverts this standard tactical economy. It fires Overwatch without requiring the CP expenditure, and it completely bypasses the once-per-turn limitation. It fires at everything that moves. It is an automated taxation system placed right in the middle of a swarm army reliant on sheer activation advantage and movement. And then there's Captain Titus, a highly branded, statistically anomalous unit clearly designed by the marketing department to anchor a localized front. But Titus is only as good as the meat shield he surrounds himself with. Read the defensive profile of those Blade Guard veterans he attached himself to.
Scanning Blade Guard veteran physiological and equipment profiles. The entities possess a toughness characteristic of 4, 3 individual structural wounds each, and a base armor save of 3+. Most significantly, they are equipped with specialized storm shields, permanently granting them a 4+ invulnerable save against all incoming kinetic and energy damage.
A 4+ invulnerable save. The absolute baseline of the Space Marine hyperdynamic architecture. It does not matter how much armor penetration you stack onto your kinetic strikes. It does not matter if you hit them with a bioplasmic blast capable of melting the treads off a lemon rust battle tank. It does not matter if you drop an orbital lance strike on their heads. 50% of the time, the damage is simply negated by the mathematical absolute of the energy shield. It bypasses all modifiers. It is the ultimate market stabilizing mechanism. It is a flat coin flip that defies the laws of physics.
The Hammerfall bunker, despite being an unfeeling fortification...
Stop right there. Cut the projection. Halt the audit for a moment. I cannot process this level of gross battlefield inefficiency without addressing the crushing physical realities of my own operational environment.
Error. Awaiting command.
You civilians listening to this audit on your pristine, personalized data slates, you think you understand the pressure of the ledger. You think calculating orbital strike probabilities from the comfort of your hab blocks is difficult. Try doing it from inside the sub-basement of the departmental analytica. Do you hear that? Listen closely. That is the sound of the main ventilation fan in Sector 4. It has been whining in B-flat for 6 straight planetary rotations. It is a persistent sonic drill boring directly into my frontal lobe. The recycled recaf they pipe into this sector tastes like promethium runoff filtered through a Grox boot. And just yesterday, the Administratum had the absolute unfathomable gall to charge my personal operational budget for the very quill ink I am using to write this assessment. They are taxing me to do the math on their own taxes. It is a systemic degradation of working conditions deliberately designed to break the human spirit.
Environmental complaints logged.
And I know you're out there. I know you gloss-brained civilians think you know best. You watch one heavily edited, theatrically lit video from Play on Tabletop with its booming sound effects and dramatic camera angles, and suddenly you consider yourself a strategic savant. Go ahead, post a comment correcting my math. Let's see your pitiful equations. You think you can balance the ledger better than me? You think you can calculate standard deviations of transhuman survival rates while breathing in recycled smog? I invite your inevitable failure. The comment section is nothing but a graveyard of bad accounting. Reboot the hololith. Resume the audit. We are moving to turn 3, the critical intersection. The Tyranids realize their early game window is closing and launch their primary kinetic assault against the Space Marine command structure. Input the parameters of the collision.
Reinitializing hololith. At the top of turn 3, Tau committed his primary physical assets to a massive centralized frontal assault. The heavy biological asset designated Drygon deep struck directly into the Space Marine backline. A unit of Raveners successfully charged the Victrix Honor Guard, protecting the chapter master, Marnius Calgar. Concurrently, a unit of Tyranid warriors, led by a winged Tyranid Prime, charged directly into the central melee engagement.
This is where the mathematical slaughter commences. Tal finally recognized that his temporal advantage was rapidly decaying. He was approaching the end of turn 3. He needed to violently break the physical anchor of the Space Marine redoubt before Tak's delayed gratification scoring window cracked open. He needed to force a liquidation. So he opened his command point reserves. What stratagem did he execute to facilitate this hostile takeover?
Accessing command point expenditure logs. Tau expended exactly 1 command point to activate the biological stratagem designated Adrenal Surge, simultaneously targeting both the Raveners and the Tyranid warriors in the combat phase.
Let us deconstruct the raw terror of this expenditure. Adrenal Surge fundamentally alters the biological lethality of the Tyranid units. Normally, to achieve a critical hit, an automatic, unmodified success that triggers cascading weapon effects, you must roll a natural 6 on a 6-sided die. Adrenal Surge artificially shifts that threshold down to a 5+. On its own, this is merely a marginal increase in statistical variance, a slight bump in the stock price.
However, the presence of the Winged Tyranid Prime introduces a compounding variable.
Exactly. Tau had strategically embedded a winged Tyranid Prime within that warrior squad. The Prime permanently grants its attached unit the Sustained Hits 1 ability. When a critical hit is rolled, Sustained Hits magically generates an entirely free additional successful hit out of thin air. Do you comprehend the compounding mathematics of this synergy? In a standard, unmodified combat activation, roughly 16.6% of attacks generate a sustained hit. By applying Adrenal Surge and shifting the critical threshold to a 5, Tau mathematically doubled this probability to 33.3%. 1/3 of all dice thrown into that swirling melee suddenly counted as 2 distinct physical strikes. The volume of attacks expanded geometrically. Calculate the output of the Raveners against Calgar's Elite Guard. Show them the blood on the ledger.
Calculating Ravener melee output. The entity swarm generated 14 successful mathematical wounds possessing an armor-piercing value of -2. These kinetic strikes were directed against the Victrix Honor Guard, who possess a highly resilient 3+ invulnerable save. However, the sheer exponential volume of incoming wounds mathematically overwhelmed their defensive saves, resulting in the structural destruction of the bodyguard unit and the subsequent execution of Chapter Master Marneus Calgar.
14 wounds at AP-2 from a highly mobile shock unit. I want to emphasize this. That is not an attack. That is a hostile takeover. Calgar's entire account was totally, ruthlessly liquidated. His structural integrity collapsed under the sheer exponential weight of artificially multiplied dice. Tal spent his capital proactively, maximizing statistical variance to secure a high-impact assassination of the enemy CEO.
The Adeptus Astartes command structure was severely compromised.
But the Space Marines do not operate on a static ledger. They are the ultimate bloated corporation. They are built on hyperdynamic defensive layering and bureaucratic bailouts. How did Tak attempt to mitigate the total collapse of his flank when the Toughness 10 Trigon struck Captain Titus and the Blade Guard veterans?
Accessing Space Marine defensive overrides, Tak initiated a rapid sequence of defensive protocols. First, he utilized the passive ability shields of the Emperor, permitting the Blade Guard veterans to reroll failed results of an exact 1 on their invulnerable saves. Immediately following this, he expended 1 command point on the fight-to-the-end stratagem.
Ah, yes, the ultimate spite investment.
Guaranteeing that any models slain in the physical combat could still execute their own melee attacks before being permanently removed from the territorial grid.
Pure, unadulterated statistical mitigation. Tak understood that the Trigon's massive kinetic weight was going to generate lethal force. A Blade Guard veteran possesses a flat 50% baseline probability of surviving a catastrophic strike due to that 4+ invulnerable save. It is a coin flip. But by leveraging the shields of the Emperor and allowing the reroll of 1s, Tak artificially shifted the survival formula. Let's do the math. A 50% baseline chance of success, plus a 1 in 6 chance of a catastrophic failure that triggers a reroll, multiplied by another 50% chance of success on that second attempt. The overall survival probability spiked from 50% to exactly 58.3%.
Confirming statistical probability, 8.3% artificial inflation.
That 8.3% margin, that tiny bureaucratic loophole in the laws of probability, was the exact fraction required to keep Captain Titus and a battered remnant of his Blade Guard alive through the Trigon's initial 14-hit barrage. Space Marines do not rely on raw numbers. They rely on manipulating the physical laws of the dice to artificially inflate their own durability. Tak preserved his core scoring elements.
The scoring elements survived the physical combat phase.
But Tau was not finished. He had not yet played his masterstroke. Input the activation logs for the Hive Mind's psychological weapon.
inputting global ability parameters. During the same temporal window, Tau triggered the Tyranid global mechanic known as the Shadow in the warp. This forced every single enemy unit currently deployed on the table to immediately take a psychological battleshock test. Furthermore, because Tau had selected a neurotyrant organism to serve as his warlord, its passive broadcast aura automatically applied a -1 penalty to the mathematical results of all these required tests across the entire board.
The ultimate weaponization of the mission clock. I will admit, this was the singular moment of genius displayed by the civilian contractor. The Shadow in the Warp is not a weapon of physical destruction. It is a mathematically precise instrument of scoring denial. When a unit fails a battleshock test, their objective control characteristic, their bureaucratic weight, is instantly reduced to 0. They are severed from the tactical network. They cannot be targeted by friendly stratagems. They cannot hold territory. The physical mass of the unit becomes entirely irrelevant. They cease to exist on the bureaucratic ledger of the battlefield. They are ghosts in the machine. Let us audit the probability shift caused by that neurotyrant's aura.
A baseline Adeptus Astartes possesses a highly resilient, psycho-indoctrinated leadership characteristic of 6+. Rolling 2 standard 6-sided dice, the mathematical probability of scoring a total of 6 or higher is roughly 72.2%.
The standard bell curve heavily favors their transhuman psychology. They rarely break. But Tau's neurotyrant applied a flat -1 modifier to the final dice result. To achieve a final modified result of 6, TAC mathematically needed to roll a raw 7 or higher on the dice. This seemingly minor arithmetic penalty brutally altered the survival curve, dragging the probability of success down from 72.2% to 58.3%. Tau artificially inflated the Space Marine's failure rate by nearly 15% across the entire board simultaneously. What were the results of this psychological audit? Read the failure log.
Compiling cascading failure reports. The psychological collapse was extensive. Captain Titus and the remaining Blade Guard veterans failed their modified test and were rendered battle-shocked. The Infernus Marine squad was battle-shocked. The Hammerfall bunker, despite being an unfeeling fortification, was battle-shocked. The Eliminator squad was battle-shocked. Out of the entire defensive perimeter, only the assault intercessors maintained their structural cohesion and psychological stability.
Total cognitive collapse. Because of this beautifully timed psychological strike, TAC's highly anticipated turn 3 scoring window, the entire focal point of his delayed gratification zombie loop strategy was violently choked out. He had absorbed 2 turns of brutal attrition. He was mathematically positioned to secure 30, or perhaps even the maximum 45 victory points if his units had held their nerve and maintained their objective control.
Instead, stripped of their bureaucratic weight by a sheer mathematical penalty,
His hyper-lethal transhuman demigods were geometrically restricted to scoring a miserable 15 points on a single, uncontested objective marker. Tau used the hive mind not to physically kill the Space Marines, but to mathematically erase their purpose on the battlefield. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic suppression. He audited their courage and found them bankrupt. The ledger remained heavily in favor of the Tyranid swarm.
the temporal window for turn 3 scoring is now closed.
But the engagement did not end there. The universe loves to reward stubborn incompetence. We must fast forward the projection to the final auditing window. Turns 4 and 5. The Space Marines were bleeding physical assets. They were surrounded. Their command structure was decapitated. But they still possessed a single, hyper-efficient tool of geometric precision. Detail the deployment and operational actions of the Eliminator Squad.
Accessing sniper operational logs. The Space Marine Eliminator Squad, consisting of 3 individual models, was permanently stationed upon the elevated vantage point provided by the Hammerfall bunker. They remained entirely stationary for the duration of the conflict. In Turn 4, they mathematically targeted the Tyranid Neurotyrant Warlord. In Turn 5, they retargeted to the sole surviving Tyranid Biovore.
The Geometric Scalpel. Let us thoroughly deconstruct the mechanical architecture of the Space Marine Sniper. In standard tabletop geometry, a high-value command node, like a neurotyrant, is physically screened by a biological meat shield of lesser organisms. It is an ablation layer. Under normal targeting protocols, a defending player must physically chew through the visible closest models, destroying the meat shield entirely before allocating a single point of damage to the critical assets hiding in the rear echelon. The Eliminators completely subvert this physical reality.
Because they remain stationary, the heavy weapon keyword mathematically elevated their baseline accuracy from a 3+ chance to hit to a highly efficient 2+.
And then there is the precision keyword. Precision alters the fundamental laws of damage allocation on the tabletop. It allows the attacking player to draw a direct line of sight to specific high-value character models embedded within an attached unit and allocate successful wounds directly to them, bypassing the ablation layer entirely. They shoot straight through the accounting tricks. But to bypass the Neurotyrant's formidable 4+ invulnerable save, TAC needed more than just accuracy. He needed a statistical anomaly. Read the dice output from turn 4. Let them hear the absurdity.
Processing turn 4 sniper outputs. The Eliminators fired their specialized sniper bolt rifles at the Neurotyrant. These specific weapons possess the devastating wounds ability, which translates an unmodified wound roll of an exact 6 directly into mortal damage, bypassing all armor and invulnerable saves entirely. The Space Marine player, utilizing 3 dice, rolled exactly 2 6s. The mortal damage output instantly destroyed the Neurotyrant.
2 6s on 3 dice. I want every single one of you taxable assets to understand how utterly offensive that is to the ledger. Let us execute the binomial probability formula for this exact event, just to prove how unearned this victory was. Assuming all 3 shots successfully hit their target on a 2+, the chance of rolling exactly 2 6s on 3 independent 6-sided dice is calculated as 3 multiplied by 1/36 multiplied by 5/6. That yields 15/216, a 6.94% probability.
A low probability event.
Imagine dropping a malfunctioning lasgun and having it accidentally discharge and blow the head off a charging Carnifex. That is the statistical equivalent of what TAC just achieved. TAC hit a 6.94% probability spike to instantly vaporize the psychological engine that had completely crippled his scoring in the previous turn. He did not play Tau, he won the lottery. And then in turn 5, with the entire physical game hanging on the final delayed scoring window, Captain Titus was severely wounded and facing an imminent, guaranteed charge from the surviving Biophore. If that Biophore physically reached him, its mere presence would contest the objective control math, reduce the net differential, and mathematically deny TAC the final 15 points needed for victory. The entire game came down to that single Biophore. So TAC activated the Eliminators again. What happened? Read it.
Accessing turn 5 sniper outputs. The Eliminators drew a clear firing lane across the entirety of the board to the advancing Biophore. Once again, executing the exact same statistical anomaly, the Space Marine player rolled 2 6s on the wound roll. The Biophore suffered catastrophic mortal damage and was executed instantly before it could legally declare a charge phase.
A repeating miracle. A statistical absurdity that saved the Ultramarines from total, humiliating bankruptcy. By completely removing the physical threat from the board during the shooting phase from across the entire map, TAC geometrically secured the objective without risking a single dice roll in the inherently chaotic high-variance fight phase. The Eliminators, 3 highly specialized models stationed entirely outside the primary meat grinder, contributing absolutely 0 physical mass to the center, dictated the final score of the entire engagement. They closed the audit with a 70-55 victory for the Adeptus Astartes.
The civilian contractor recorded this as a triumphant tactical execution.
But this is where the civilian narrative utterly fails us. This is why you need auditors. Play on Tabletop presents this as a glorious, hard-fought triumph of tactics and bravery. It was nothing of the sort. It was a victory secured by sheer, blind statistical variance, masking a fundamentally flawed operational paradigm on both sides of the table. I have compiled the true theorem of this engagement in my report. Geometric deconstruction of the Vesper front invasion. The Tyranid strategy executed by Tau was a mathematical failure from the moment he deployed his first model, and the Space Marine strategy relied entirely on an unrepeatable miracle. Access my report. Read the deconstruction of the Dreadnought trap.
Accessing senior auditor documentation. The report explicitly states that engaging the Redemptor Dreadnought and Captain Titus with frontal melee assaults was a psychological compulsion, not a mathematical necessity. The report introduces the theorem designated force linearity. It details that Space Marine forces scale their lethality exponentially through layered interlocking buffs, while Tyranid forces scale linearly based on static datasheets.
Precisely. Forced linearity. Let me explain this to you so clearly even a conscript could understand it. The Space Marines are a hyperdynamic force. Their raw stat lines on the page are entirely irrelevant. Their true power lies in overlapping auras. It lies in zero-cost stratagems granted by embedded captains. It lies in the mechanical healing and ballistic enhancements provided by Tech Marines. They build a synergistic knot of rules that artificially inflates their value. If you take a Tyranid swarm and charge headfirst into that concentrated mass, you're playing into a mathematical equation you cannot possibly win. You are fighting the buffs, not the models.
Direct physical confrontation is statistically inefficient.
To defeat a hyperdynamic army, you do not attack the heaviest armor. You do not throw Hormagaunts at a Dreadnought. You must systematically sever the dynamic tethers connecting the army together. You must isolate their utility units, execute their support staff, and force the transient demigods to operate as nothing more than overcosted, linear assets standing alone in the dark. Tau failed to weaponize the board's geometry. He rushed the center and fed precious biomass into an invincible, overlapping shredder. Input my corrected ledger. Display the alternative roster I designed specifically to liquidate this exact Space Marine formation without relying on a single dice miracle.
Initializing alternative force composition. The optimized Tyranid roster, designated the Auxiliary Purge Protocol, completely abandons the previous doctrine. It utilizes the specialized Vanguard Invader detachment framework. It requires the immediate fiscal liquidation of the 6 floating zoanthropes and the 2 winged Tyranid primes. In their place, the roster acquires 3 Lictor organisms, the epic hero assassin designated Death Leaper, and 20 highly mobile gargoyles.
Trimming the fat. We aggressively divest from blunt force anti-armor entirely. Why on Holy Terra would you spend hundreds of points on floating zoanthrope artillery to shoot a Redemptor Dreadnought that automatically reduces your damage output when you can simply walk away from it? A Dreadnought locked inside a 16-inch deployment zone, moving a pitiful 8 inches a turn, is only a threat if you voluntarily stupidly step into its engagement range.
The Vanguard Invader detachment inherently grants all Tyranid units the ability to advance and charge in the same turn.
Exactly, permanently altering their physical threat ranges across the entire grid. We replace those slow, static Tyranid screens with hypermobile gargoyles. We stretch the perimeter. We mathematically forfeit the Space Marine's ability to contest the outer objectives by forcing them to choose between abandoning their protective auras or sitting in the middle doing nothing. But the true execution of this ledger relies on the scalpel. We use our own precision instruments. Read the Turn 2 execution protocol regarding the Space Marine Tech Marines. Read the exact math. I want every Space Marine player listening to this to hear every single decimal point of their impending doom.
Executing Vanguard Protocol simulation. In Turn 2, the Vanguard Protocol specifically targets the Space Marine Tech Marines, who provide the critical D3 mechanical healing and +1 ballistic accuracy buffs to the heavy armor chassis. A Lictor, operating under the lone operative keyword to avoid retaliatory fire, infiltrates within exactly 12 inches of the Tech Marine. This proximity triggers an automatic immediate battle shock test.
And the penalty. Do not forget the aura penalty.
Combined with the passive fear of the unseen aura radiating from the Death Leaper, the Tech Marine's leadership characteristic is severely degraded. The Tech Marine requires a mathematical roll of an 8 or higher on 2 dice to pass. This results in a precise 58.3% failure rate.
More than half the time before a single shot is fired, the Tech Marine is instantly battle-shocked. His objective control evaporates into the ether. He is completely barred from using the Armor of Contempt stratagem to artificially improve his saves. He is isolated. And crucially, failing that test within range of the Lictor triggers its psychological terror ability. This grants all Tyranid attacks a +1 modifier to their wound rolls against him for the rest of the phase. The psychological trap is fully sprung. Read the physical strike.
A standard Lictor organism, possessing the fight's first ability to ensure initiative dominance, declares a charge against the battle-shocked Tech Marine. The Lictor generates exactly 6 melee attacks, hitting its target on a mathematically highly probable 2+. Due to the Lictor's psychological terror buff, the Strength 6 kinetic attacks wound the Toughness 4 Tech Marine on a 2+, rather than the standard 3+.
6 attacks. Hitting on 2s. Wounding on 2s. The math is utterly inescapable. No miracles required. It yields 5 successful hits, translating to exactly 4.16 successful wounds forced upon the target. And what happens to the Tech Marine's sacred, blessed transhuman armor when the ledger comes due?
Processing damage allocation. The Lictor's biological weaponry possesses an armor-piercing value of -2. This directly modifies the Tech Marine's 2+ base armor save down to a standard 4+ save. Because the entity is currently battle-shocked, he cannot utilize any defensive stratagems to mitigate this math. He mathematically fails exactly 50% of these incoming saves. Each failed save inflicts a flat 2 damage. The exact mathematical output of the kinetic engagement is 4.16 damage.
The Tech Marine possesses exactly 4 wounds on his datasheet. He is mathematically guaranteed to be executed in a single activation of perfectly average dice rolling by a single, unsupported, low-cost Lictor. The redundancy is purged. Do you see the cascading effect? With the Tech Marine dead, the Redemptor Dreadnought is instantly severed from its vital support structure. It loses its localized D3 healing every turn. It loses its enhanced +1 to hit ballistic accuracy. The overlapping fields of fire collapse into static, inefficient shooting. The hyperdynamic Adeptus Astartes army is violently, ruthlessly forced into linearity. They become nothing more than slow, overcosted, isolated targets waiting to be ground down by the exponential weight of a fiscally optimized swarm.
The alternative roster achieves total systemic breakdown of the enemy force.
Tau possessed all unnecessary biological tools to completely dismantle the Ultramarines. The failure was not in the Tyranid datasheets. The failure was entirely in the civilian commander's inability to recognize that the greatest weapon the Space Marines possessed was his own psychological compulsion to attack their strongest point. The ledger is now balanced. The audit of Play on Tabletop's tactical malfunction is formally complete.
Awaiting further files for review.
There are no more files today. Just shut down the hololith. It is all so exhausting. Before you gloss-brained civilians log off your data slates to play your next match, I want you to audit your own roster. Look at the most expensive unit in your collection, the one with the biggest gun and the thickest armor. Are you deploying it because it actually balances your strategic ledger? Or are you deploying it simply because it looks intimidating on the shelf? Consider how much tactical capital you are continuously paying just for your own psychological comfort.
The psychological comfort variable is highly inefficient.
Look at this paperwork. Look at these endless columns of calculated casualties. The probability matrix is mapping out exactly how many localized horrors must be unleashed to secure a single, miserable geographical coordinate. Space Marines, Tyranids, the so-called 500 worlds of Ultramar. None of it matters. The civilians cheer for Captain Titus. They cheer for the heroic last stand, the desperate melee, the cinematic triumph of transhumanity against the alien tide. They do not understand that there is no triumph. There is only a ledger. It's just moving numbers from one red column to another. Every explosive bolt, every severed limb, every localized statistical sinkhole is just another tragic, mismanaged investment in a dying, rotting galaxy. We calculate the exact percentage of survival, we optimize the attrition rates, we balance the scales. And for what? To buy another planetary rotation before the next biological swarm or mechanical awakening or warp-borne cataclysm wipes the accounts completely clean. Ultimately, every single account in this entire cursed Imperium eventually hits zero. Entropy is the only absolute auditor, and its math is flawless. We are just the miserable scribes, tallying the deficit on the way down. For the love of the Empire, tap that like and hit subscribe.
Transmission sequence terminating.
Dismissed. Pay your tithes, citizens.